Hey, this is Manav Misra, aka Codefinity, and a common point of confusion comes up with a lot of my students when we're first learning about import and export modules. So let's take a quick look and break that down in a relatively simple setup. So I've just got a couple of files here. It really doesn't matter, what they are. This is just called test.js, and so I'm literally just exporting out a string. That's it. Which is one of the first things we need to understand is there's nothing fancy about an export. It doesn't have to be like a class or a function or anything like that. Typically it is to be useful, but we can just export out just a simple string that says hi. Now you'll notice that there is no const here. There's no name given as a variable, nothing like that. It's just export default and a string hi. When we do that, this is typically only used when we are just exporting out one thing, typically. And so we just say export default, and that's it. We don't give it a name. So what that means is when we import it from that file, then we give it a name, literally whatever we want. So that's all that's happening here. A default export is like an anonymous export. Usually just means there's just one main thing that's exported out. When we import it, we name it. And the result of all that is simply that, we can see hi in the console. Now, let's switch this up a little bit. What if I want to export out a couple of things, okay? So then, or let me just do it like this. Let's say export const greeting equals hi. Okay, and I'm going to get a linter warning here because with the Airbnb style guide, which I'm using, it's configured to say, hey, if you're only exporting one thing, you should use default. Don't worry about that. Just notice now that we are now giving it a name and it's called greeting. Let's not change anything on this side and let's see what happens. So we're going to get undefined down here. And the reason why is because this thing already comes with a name. It's the name greeting. So I would need to grab that on this side. Let me show you two things, though, before we wrap this up. First way, which is not typically used, but maybe helps us understand exactly what is that module that's coming out. I'm going to say import everything star as whatever. Okay, so this way I can say, I don't really care about the names. I'm going to import it, just everything that's coming out, whether it's one thing or 10 things, and I am going to name it whatever. Let's take a look at what's in the console now. And now we have an object module, and this is an object that has the name greeting on it, okay? And that is all a module is, really. When we export it out in this fashion, it's going to be wrapped up in an object and given a key or a property name of greeting. And that really probably isn't too surprising because everything in JavaScript is an object except primitives. So you'll hear folks say that quite a bit, and that's part of what that means. So now we see that this is an object. What we can do now is destructure. So usually we don't say import star as, because if I wanted to use that, I would have to say console.log whatever dot greeting. Just like any other object, I have to use dot notation to get in there, or you could use bracket notation, but not that typical. So now it'll work. We'll see hi again, okay? So that's what we want to understand. A default export is just that individual one thing coming out of there, and we name it when it comes in. Whenever we do an export like this with a const and we name it, then it's coming out wrapped up in an object, more specifically an ES module. So like I said, we don't typically do it like this because this can get cumbersome. If we have a bunch of stuff that's in this module that we're importing, then we got to say dot this, dot that. So sometimes, or most of the time, what I like to do is just destructure. So I'm just going to say, yeah, I specifically want greeting, rather. There's no whatever. I want greeting to come out of this ECMAScript module. So I need to make sure that I match the name of that key, just like I would for any other object. So when I do that, I get the desired result without having to use dot notation. Finally, just in case that destructuring looks a little bit weird to you, as a quick review, if I have a simple object like this, I have two ways to get to the name. I can say me.name, I can log that or whatever, or I can say const destructure name from the object. So this is all we're doing. Destructuring for an object means we throw some braces on here and we pull out the exact properties we need. So this is very similar to what we're doing up here. This is just doing it in an import. So I think I've already said finally a couple of times, but finally, export default, usually just when you have one thing you want to send out and you don't name it. Otherwise, if you give it a name on your export, the import, you typically want to destructure it by name in order to use it. Hopefully that helps clear up confusion that students have about when do we destructure and when do we not destructure. If it's a default, no destructuring. If it's a named export, destructuring. Again, typically, there are a few exceptions as always.